The grit was in his teeth, a fine powder of New Mexico ground into his gums. Elias Granger tasted the last of his water 3 days ago, and the last of his luck 2 hours after that, when the rustlers had taken his horse and left him with a hole in his side. He was a man undone by the sun. His world had shrunk to the rhythmic agony of his left leg dragging through sagebrush, the throb of the bullet wound under his sweat-stiffened shirt, and the buzzing of flies that had decided he was not long for this world. The cattle deal in Santa Fe had gone sour, a rot of bad whiskey and worse tempers. The men he had trusted, or at least partnered with, had shown their true faces when the money was counted. Now they were gone, and so was the herd. He was left with the consequences, bleeding out on the flats. Elias stumbled, his boot catching on a length of cholla, and he went down hard on his knees. The impact sent a fresh, blinding wave of pain from his ribs up to his skull. He was done. He knew it with the simple, cold certainty of a man watching a blizzard roll in. You either found shelter or you were buried. He tried to push himself up, but his arms felt like wet rope. The sky, a perfect, hateful blue for the last week, was beginning to curdle. To the west, dark gray clouds bruised the horizon, the color of an old wound, a storm, the desert's bitter joke. It would either drown him in a flash flood or miss him entirely, leaving him to bake. He looked up, his vision swimming. The flat expanse was broken, not 50 yards ahead, by a deep shadow, a cut in the earth, a canyon. He crawled. He did not walk or run. He dragged himself over rock and thorn, the buzz of the flies growing louder in his ears, or perhaps just in his head. He left a dark, sluggish trail. Each movement was a negotiation with oblivion. When he reached the lip of the canyon, he did not pause to admire the view. He rolled, tumbling over the edge in a clumsy, painful avalanche of dust and loose scree. He landed on a patch of sandy earth 10 feet below, the fall knocking the last puff of air from his lungs. He lay on his back, staring up at the slice of angry sky. The first drop of rain, fat and cold, struck his forehead. It felt like a judgment, then a second drop, and a third. The heavens opened with a crack of thunder that seemed to split the world. The dry arroyo around him would be a river in minutes. He knew he should move, get to higher ground, but his body had refused the order. He closed his eyes. It was as good a place to die as any. Darkness was pulling at the edges of his sight when a shape blotted out the gray sky. It was just a silhouette, undefined against the storm. He thought it might be an angel, or perhaps one of the buzzards grown impatient. But it was solid. It knelt beside him. He felt a hand, surprisingly strong, touch his neck. It was not a gentle touch, but a practical one. Checking for life, he smelled rain, wet creosote, and something else, something like ozone and crushed herbs. He must have blacked out. His next memory was of being dragged, his boots scraping uselessly against the stone. The figure was smaller than him, but possessed a wiry, desperate strength. They were moving into the canyon wall, into a shadow deeper than the storm. He felt a moment of panic. This was a burial. He was being dragged into his own grave, but the air was dry, and the sound of the rain faded to a dull roar behind them. He was lowered, not gently, onto a hard-packed earth floor. The world went black for good. Elias woke to the smell of smoke and something sharp, like vinegar and mint. His head was thick, his mouth tasting like the bottom of a boot. A single candle burned on a small, rough-hewn table, its light flickering against adobe walls. He was inside. He tried to sit up, and a bolt of pure fire shot through his left side. He choked back a gasp, his hand flying to the wound. His shirt was gone. In its place was a thick, dark green poultice, held firm with strips of clean cotton. It smelled of sage and something else, something metallic. Lie still. The voice was low and rough, like stones rubbing together. It came from the shadows beyond the candle. A figure moved, stepping into the weak light. It was a woman. She was not the angel he had imagined. Her face was sharp, her cheekbones high and stark, her skin the color of tanned deer hide, pulled taut. Her hair was black, thick, and pulled back in a severe braid that exposed the elegant line of her throat. But it was her eyes he noticed. They were dark, almost black, and held no pity, only a sharp, assessing intelligence. She looked at him the way a hawk looks at a rabbit, deciding if it was worth the effort. "Where am I?" he rasped. She did not answer immediately. She was stirring something in a small iron pot set near a tiny, glowing hearth. The room was small, dug into the canyon wall itself, more cave than cabin. The air was thick with the scent of drying plants. "You are in a safe place," she said, her words clipped. "For now." She walked toward him, holding a steaming cup. She wore a simple brown skirt and a faded cotton blouse, the sleeves rolled up to her elbows. He saw her arms. They were lean and strong, but it was the skin that held his gaze. Her forearms were a map of old scars, thin white lines, puckered burns, and one long, jagged mark that looked like it had been made by a broken bottle. She knelt beside the pallet he lay on. He was on a pile of furs and woven blankets, and for the first time, he realized he was warm. He had not been warm in days. "Drink," she commanded. He tried to lift his head, but he was too weak. She sighed, a small puff of exasperation, and slid a strong arm behind his shoulders, lifting him just enough. She put the cup to his lips. The liquid was hot and unbelievably bitter. He gagged, but she pressed the cup firmer. "Drink it all. It will stop the fever." He drank, the brew scorching a path down his throat. When it was gone, she lowered him back down. Her touch was firm, professional. Yet as she moved her arm, her fingers brushed his bare chest. Her hand was calloused, but the touch was gentle. It was a strange contrast to her sharp eyes and sharper voice. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice a little stronger. "I am Mirabelle." She stood, moving back to the shadows, her skirt swirling around her ankles. She seemed to be a creature of shadow and firelight. Elias Granger, I did not ask your name. Elias Granger, I asked you to lie still." He obeyed, mostly because he had no choice. He let his head fall back onto the pallet. His eyes, adjusting to the dim light, began to take in the room. It was meticulously clean, but it was not a normal woman's home. From the low, smoke-darkened ceiling, dozens of bundles hung, twisting in the faint draft from the door. He saw dried herbs. Yes, sage, rosemary, thyme, but there was more. Bundles of gnarled roots that looked like claws, strings of dried, hollowed-out gourds, and bones, small, delicate bones, tied together with sinew, a bird's skull, the bleached, curved spine of a snake, a coyote's jaw. His gaze followed the hanging things to the corner, where a small alcove was carved into the rock. It was a shrine. A few burned-down candle nubs sat before a collection of objects, a chipped porcelain doll missing an eye, a smooth black river stone, and a small, carved wooden cross that was tied upside down. Mirabelle had moved to the shrine. She lit a bundle of sage, and the room filled with its clean, sharp smoke. She began to murmur, her back to him. He could not make out the words. It was not English. It was half Spanish, her voice a low, rhythmic chant, but it was punctuated by harder, older-sounding words that scraped his nerves. She was praying, but not to any god he recognized. He was in the home of a strange woman, her walls decorated with bones, her arms scarred, her prayers spoken in a language that raised the hair on his arms. He was wounded, helpless. He should have been terrified. Instead, he felt the burning bitterness of the tea spreading through his limbs, a heavy, sinking warmth. The fever was already breaking. He closed his eyes. His dreams were a torment. He was back in Santa Fe, the saloon loud with bad piano music and the smell of cheap tequila. He saw the face of Jed, the man who had shot him, his yellow teeth bared in a grin. Then the saloon was on fire. The flames licked at the walls, and the piano music turned into a scream. He was in the desert again, but it was night, and the sagebrush was burning, each bush a torch. He heard whispers in the smoke, carried on the wind, the same words, over and over. La Maldita, The cursed one. La maldita. La maldita. He saw a woman in the fire. She was dancing, her hair unbound, her arms covered in scars. She turned, and it was Mirabelle, but her eyes were hollow, and she was weeping tears of ash. Elias woke with a jolt, his body slick with sweat. The candle was gone. Gray dawn light filtered in through the hide-covered doorway. The room was cold. Mirabelle was gone. The poultice on his side had been changed while he slept. He lay there for a long time, listening to the silence of the canyon. The storm had passed. All he heard was the distant drip of water and the caw of a raven. She returned in the afternoon, carrying a basket filled with roots and a dead rabbit. She did not seem surprised to find him awake and lucid. She set about skinning the rabbit with an efficient, brutal grace that he, as a man of the plains, could not help but admire. "You should not be here," she said, not looking at him. "I didn't have much choice in the matter, ma'am." Elias said. His voice was stronger. "The desert does not like men like you." She paused, the skinning knife still in her hand. "Men who bring trouble. Men who bring bullets. The trouble found me. I wasn't looking for it. It does not matter." She finished her work and began to wash her hands in a wooden basin. "When you can walk, you will leave." "I can't leave. Not yet." He pushed himself up on one elbow, the effort costing him. "Those men, they'll still be looking for me. I've got no horse, no gun, and I'm in your debt." She turned, wiping her hands on her apron. Her black eyes fixed him. "I ask for no payment. I want only for you to be gone." "I can't go, but I can work," he said, the words coming out in a rush. He was a proud man, and he hated this helplessness. "I can pay for my keep. Your fence is down by the arroyo. I saw it before, and that door hinge is about to give. I can fix it. I'm good with my hands." Mirabelle looked at him for a long, silent minute. He felt as though she were weighing his soul, measuring his words not for their truth, but for the trouble they carried. He could see the conflict in her face. She was a woman who had learned, the hard way, to be alone. She had learned to fear the outside world, and he was the outside world, bleeding on her floor. "You will eat," she said finally. "You will heal, you will work, and then you will leave." She turned back to the hearth, and Elias knew the conversation was over. He had bought himself some time. He laid his head back down, the smell of the rabbit stew already starting to fill the small room. And for the first time in a week, he did not feel like a dead man. The next few days fell into a rhythm. Elias's body, thanks to her bitter teas and pungent salves, healed at a remarkable rate. The bullet had gone clean through, a miracle of bad aim and dumb luck. It had cracked a rib, but it had missed his vitals. He was weak, but he was whole. True to his word, he began to work. At first, it was small tasks he could do sitting. He sharpened her knives, mended a broken chair leg, rewrapped the handle of her axe. She watched him, her silence a heavy blanket. She spoke only to give an order or to answer a direct question. And even then, her answers were short, clipped things that gave nothing away. When he was strong enough to stand for more than an hour, he moved outside. The homestead was a small, 3-room adobe structure, built flush against the rock wall, invisible from above. She had a small, terraced garden that was being overtaken by weeds, and a goat pen with a badly sagging fence. He started with the fence. His muscles screamed in protest. His side ached, but the simple, honest work felt good. It centered him. He split new posts from a fallen cottonwood down in the arroyo and reset the line, pulling the wire taut. As he worked, he watched her. She was a creature of routine. She rose before the sun, sang her strange, minor key prayers, and then disappeared into the desert with her basket. She would return hours later, her basket full, her skirt hemmed with dust, and spend the afternoon grinding, drying, and bundling. She lived in a world of plants and remedies. One afternoon, he heard a sound from behind the cabin, a low, pathetic whimpering. He rounded the corner and found her kneeling on the ground. In her lap was a tiny coyote pup. its leg caught in the jaws of a rusted trap. Elias moved to help, to put the animal out of its misery. "Hold on, I'll get my knife." "No!" Her voice was steel. "Do not move." She spoke to the animal, not in English, not in Spanish, but in a low, crooning hum. It was the same cadence as her morning prayers. She laid one hand on the pup's head, and it stopped struggling. It just watched her. With her other hand, she slowly, carefully, worked the jaws of the trap. Her fingers were strong, and he saw a fresh trickle of blood run down her wrist as the rusted metal bit into her skin. She did not flinch. With a final, sharp crack, the trap sprang open. The pup yelped, but she held it firm, her hands already coated in a salve she had pulled from her pocket. She bound the small, broken leg with strips of cloth and a pair of twigs. Then she set the animal down in a small, straw-filled box he hadn't noticed before. She stood and looked at Elias, her eyes daring him to speak. He just nodded, his respect for her deepening. She was a healer. She did not care if the patient was a man or a beast. She fought for life, wherever she found it. Her gentleness was as fierce as her silence. He was almost fully healed when the trader came. His name was Silas, a wiry, nervous man who drove a single mule loaded with pots, blankets, and gossip. He rode into the canyon with a mix of bravado and terror, calling out, "Trade, trade!" before he even saw the cabin. He stopped dead when he saw Elias leaning against the new fence. "Good Lord alive," Silas whispered, his eyes wide. "I thought the spirits had got me for sure." "Just me," Elias said, wiping his hands on his trousers. "Elias Granger. Silas Croft." The trader's eyes darted past Elias, toward the cabin, as if expecting something to leap out. You living here?" "Resting," Elias said. "Had some trouble up north. The lady of the house took me in." Silas's face went pale. "The lady?" he squeaked. "You mean you're with her?" "Her name is Mirabelle," Elias said, a protective edge creeping into his voice. "I know her name." Silas spat on the ground, a quick, jerky motion. "Merciful heavens. Man, you don't know where you are. You're on Caliente Ridge. This is the cursed woman's land." Elias felt a cold prickle, the memory of his fever dream. "La Maldita." "Aye." Silas's voice dropped, and he leaned in, his eyes wide with the superstitious fear of a small-minded man. "You best get clear, friend. Nothing good happens here. She's poison." "She's a healer," Elias said flatly. "She saved my life." "That's how she gets you," Silas hissed. "She draws you in, but everything she touches, it rots. I seen it. I'm from Caliente, the town over. I knew her before." Elias stayed silent, his arms crossed. He wanted to hear it. He needed to understand the fear that clung to this place like the sharp scent of sage. "She came here 10 years ago," Silas began, his voice warming to the tale. "Her family was with her. They came up from the south, from Mexico way. They said, settled right here. First, the flood. A summer storm, just like the one that brought you. The arroyo swelled, and her parents and her little brother washed away, all of them. Only she survived. Climbed right up this rock face, they say, without a scratch, while her family drowned." He paused, letting the weight of it sink in. That was just the start. She came into town, half wild. The church folk took her in, tried to make her normal. She was pretty, I'll give her that. Men looked at her, too many men. She got herself engaged to a good man, Paul Aguirre, a rancher, set to be married. Silas shook his head, his eyes dark. A week before the wedding, he vanished, just gone. His horse came back, but he didn't. They searched for weeks. Nothing. Maybe he just left her, Elias offered. Paul wasn't a leaver, not like that. After he was gone, she changed, started coming out here, started collecting her roots and bones. People started to whisper. Then the crops failed on the farms that bordered her land. Just her land, a mile away. They were fine. The Jensen's prize bull dropped dead, right on her property line. Old Man Hemlock's wife had a stillbirth, and she swore she'd seen Mirabelle looking at her through the window the night before. The trader was sweating now, caught up in the terror of his own story. Men fear her. They say she walks at night and sings to the coyotes. They say she can sour milk with a look, and the women— Silas laughed, a dry, harsh sound. The women call her a temptress. They say she lured Paul Aguirre to his doom, that she put a spell on him because he wouldn't have her wild ways. And you believe all this? Elias asked, his voice low. I believe what I see, Silas said, pulling at his collar. And I see a man who ought to know better. You stay here, Elias Granger. You'll end up like Paul Aguirre, vanished, or worse. Elias looked at the trader, at his pale, frightened face. And he did something that surprised them both. He laughed. It was a short, dry chuckle. I've been shot by rustlers and left for dead. I've been half drowned in a flash flood. I think I can handle one woman and a few bad stories. Silas. Silas looked at him like he was insane. Suit yourself, but don't say I didn't warn you. The trader refused to get off his mule. He sold Elias a small bag of coffee and a bar of soap, his hands shaking as he made the trade, his eyes never leaving the cabin door. He was gone in a cloud of dust, making the sign of the cross as he rode out of the canyon. Elias stood there for a long time, the small bag of coffee heavy in his hand. He looked at the cabin, at the wisp of smoke rising from the chimney. He thought of the stories, a flood, a vanished fiancé, failed crops, a stillbirth. It was a heavy weight of misfortune for one person to carry. He thought about the superstitious, fearful nature of small towns, how they needed someone to blame when the world turned cruel. But as he stood there, he also thought of her scarred hands, her sharp, lonely eyes, and the way she had hummed to a wounded animal. He laughed it off. He told himself, just stories. But as he turned to go back inside, he knew it was more than that. He was beginning to see the shape of the thing that haunted her. It was not a curse. It was a grief so deep and so total that it had carved her out, leaving nothing but silence and remedies. And the world, in its fear, had called that emptiness a curse. He found himself, for the first in his life, wanting to understand a silence. He wanted to know the woman behind the whispers. The trader's dust was long settled, but his words hung in the canyon air like a bad smell. Elias watched Mirabelle from the fence line, his hands raw from digging post holes. He had seen the way Silas Croft had looked at her, the quick, spat-out sign of the cross. He had heard the tales, poison, La Maldita. And he had watched her, that same afternoon, spend 2 hours grinding a fine blue powder from a lump of turquoise and minerals, which she then mixed with lard and bound to his ribs. The ache that had plagued him for a week was gone by sundown. The woman the trader described and the woman who lived in this canyon were two different people. Elias decided he would trust the one he could see. His strength returned with the steady work. The wound in his side was a puckered, healing scar, no longer the weeping hole it had been. He was a man made of sinew and stubbornness, and his body, fed on her rabbit stews and bitter, life-giving teas, knit itself back together. He set his mind to the chicken coop. The old one was a wreck, a stiff wind away from collapsing. He scavenged wood from a collapsed section of the canyon wall, splitting the dry, ancient timber with her axe. He worked from dawn until the heat drove him to shade. He was aware of her, always. She would bring him a tin cup of cool water at midday, set it on a rock 10 feet from him, and leave. No words, just the act. In return, she began to speak, not much, but more. One evening, as she ground herbs in a stone mortar, he watched her hands. They were strong, the pestle rising and falling in a steady rhythm. "What is that one for?" he asked, nodding to the pile of dried, feathery leaves. She did not look up. "Yarrow, it stops the blood, and the one that smells like vinegar. Mugwort, for the fever." She paused, then pushed a small, woody bundle toward him. "Chew this." He picked it up. It looked like a twig. He put it in his mouth. His entire head immediately went numb, the taste of dry earth and electricity on his tongue. He coughed, spitting it out. She allowed herself a small, shadow of a smile. It was the first he had seen, and it transformed her face, softening the sharp angles. Toothache root. You keep it, in case you talk too much. He laughed, a real, rusty sound. He had not laughed in months. After that, the lessons began. She taught him which plants to fear and which to respect. She showed him how to find the water-hoarding roots of the yucca, how to scrape the venom from a centipede's sting, how to read the clouds for a sign of rain. In turn, he showed her how to brace a wall, how to set a clean, sharp edge on a knife, how to build a coop that a snake could not enter. He finished the chicken coop on a Tuesday. It was a fine, solid thing. The hinges made of carefully carved wood, the latch secure. He had even built a small nesting box. She came out to see it, her expression unreadable. She walked around it, pushed on the walls. She opened and closed the small door, testing the latch 3 times. She knelt, her dark hair falling over her shoulder, and sighted along the base, checking for gaps. Finally, she stood, wiping dust from her hands onto her skirt. "It is a good coop," she said. It was the highest praise he had ever heard. That night, they sat by the hearth. The silence between them had changed. It was no longer an absence, but a shared space. It was comfortable. "You're good with your hands," she said, her voice quiet. "Building, fixing." "My father was a carpenter," Elias said, surprised to be sharing. "I just picked it up. Never had much talent for it. I was always better at leaving." "Why did you leave?" "The war," he said simply. "After that, staying in one place felt wrong, like wearing a boot on the wrong foot, so I kept moving west. Drove cattle, mostly. But this last time, the men I was with, I misjudged them. Badly." She nodded, her eyes on the flames. "Men are easy to misjudge. They come here full of wind, and the desert drinks them dry. It takes what is weak and leaves the rest." He looked at her, at the profile of her face in the firelight. "You ever think about leaving, going back to town? To Caliente?" Her hands, which had been resting in her lap, clenched. "I lived in town, once." He waited. The fire crackled, filling the silence. "I was supposed to be married," she whispered, so low he had to lean in to hear. "I had a white dress. My mother's. I was happy, I think." "What happened?" he asked, his voice gentle. Mirabelle's face closed. The warmth vanished, the walls slamming shut. "Things happened," she said, and the words were stones. "The town. It does not like me, and I do not like it. It is better to be here, alone." Elias knew not to push. The door had been opened a crack, and just as quickly, bolted. He had seen the woman who was to be married. And in the same instant, he saw the woman who had survived what came after. The summer was a heavy, wet blanket. The air thick with the promise of storms that never came. The heat built for weeks. The sky a shimmering, white-hot lid. Elias's rib was a memory, and his hands were calloused from work. He had repaired the roof, built her a proper table, and dug a new latrine. He realized with a jolt, made a home here. He had no horse, no money, and no desire to be anywhere else. Then the storm broke. It came at dusk, the sky turning a sickly, greenish black. The clouds did not roll in. They exploded overhead. The first crack of lightning was not a distant rumble, but a spear of white-hot fire that struck the ridge above them. The world split apart in a crash of thunder that shook the fillings in his teeth. Elias, inside, watched the rain begin. It was not rain. It was a deluge, a solid wall of water. He heard a sound, a scream. It was not the wind. He looked around the small cabin. Mirabelle was gone. The door was open, swinging on its mended hinges. "Mirabelle!" he shouted, panic seizing him. He ran outside, into the chaos. The wind tore the breath from his lungs. The rain was so cold it stung his skin. The arroyo, dry for a decade, was already a churning, muddy roar. "Mirabelle!" He saw her. She was not near the cabin. She was standing on the edge of the newly formed cliff, where the garden used to be. The chicken coop was gone. swallowed by the flash flood. But she was not looking at the coop. She was standing in the full force of the storm, her hair ripped from its braid, her clothes plastered to her body. She was screaming. It was a raw, primal, animal sound of pure, undiluted agony. She was screaming at the sky. Another bolt of lightning lit the canyon, and in its stark, blue-white light, Elias saw her face. It was not the calm, guarded woman he knew. It was a mask of terror and rage. He ran to her, slipping in the mud. He grabbed her arm. She was ice cold. "Mirabelle, come inside. It's not safe." She fought him. She hit his chest with her fists, her nails raking his arm. She was all wiry strength and desperation. "No, let me go. He took them. He took them all." Who took them?" he yelled over the storm. The water took them." She collapsed. Her anger broke, and it was replaced by a grief so profound it was like a physical weight. She sank to her knees in the mud, her screams turning into shuddering, broken sobs. Elias forgot the lightning. He forgot the flood. He knelt in the mud in front of her, pulling her against his chest. He did not say a word. He just held her. He held her as she shook, as she wept, as she pounded her fists against the wet earth. He was a solid thing in a world that was washing away. He was an anchor, and for the first time in 10 years, Mirabelle held on. He half carried, half dragged her back inside. The floor was already wet, the wind howling through the cracks. He barred the door, shutting out the storm. But the storm was already inside. She was shaking violently, her teeth chattering. He stripped his own dry shirt off and threw it over her, pushing her toward the hearth. He piled wood onto the embers, coaxing a blaze. "It's the day," she whispered, her voice broken. She was huddled in on herself, rocking. "It's the day. It always comes back." "What day?" "The flood," she said. "The day it took my family, my mother, my father, my little brother, all at once. The same sky, the same sound." Elias said nothing. He just built the fire. "And then," she whispered, her voice cracking. "It was the same week, the same storm, 1 year later, that Paul left." She broke down again, a silent, terrible weeping. Elias sat on the floor beside her. He did not touch her. He just sat, his presence a silent promise. He let her grieve. After a long time, the shaking subsided. The fire was a roar now, filling the room with heat and light. She was still, her breathing ragged. She was huddled, her wet clothes clinging to her. Her shirt had gaped at the side, and in the firelight, he saw it. It was not the thin white lines on her arms. It was a scar, stark and silver, that ran from just under her arm down across her ribs. It was wide and puckered, an ugly, violent mark, long-healed. He did not think. He only felt. He felt the pain of this woman, the loneliness, the sheer, brutal weight of her past. He reached out, his hand slow, his fingers rough and calloused. He did not touch her skin. He gently, so gently, traced the line of the scar on the outside of her wet cotton blouse. A question, not a claim. Mirabelle flinched, her whole body tensing. Her eyes, red-rimmed and raw, snapped to his. She was poised to flee, to bite, to claw. She saw his face. She saw the storm in his eyes, but it was a storm of understanding, not of judgment. It was quiet, and it was deep. She held her breath, and she let him. She did not pull away. She let his fingers rest over the mark. It was a touch that acknowledged the wound beneath, a touch that did not recoil. A single tear rolled down her cheek, but it was not from grief. It was from something else, something she had not felt in a decade. Release. The moment stretched. The storm raged outside, but in the cabin, there was only the sound of the fire and their breathing. He leaned in. She watched him, her eyes wide. He moved slowly, giving her every chance to turn away. He pressed his lips to hers. It was not a kiss of passion. It was a kiss of comfort. It was warm, and it tasted of salt and rain and wood smoke. It was a promise that she was not, in this moment, alone. He pulled back. She was trembling, but for a different reason. Then, Her eyes hardened. The fear came rushing back. A different, sharper fear. She scrambled away from him, pulling her shirt tight. "No," she whispered, her voice full of panic. "No, you cannot. Mirabel, you must go," she said, her voice rising. "You are healed. You are strong. You must leave. Now. I'm not leaving you. Not in this. You do not understand," she cried, her hands pulling at her hair. "You cannot stay here. If you want to leave, leave before it's too late." "Too late for what?" "Too late for you," she said, her eyes wild. "Everything I touch, everyone, they leave. They are taken. Do not be the next one. Go in the morning, please." She was begging him. She was not pushing him away for her own sake. She was pushing him away for his. The next day, the sun rose on a world scrubbed clean. The canyon was a wreck. The arroyo a muddy soup, but the air was fresh. Elias woke on his pallet to the sound of her grinding herbs. The night before might have been a dream, a fever, but the look in her eyes was real. She was terrified. "I'm going to town," he said, pulling on his boots. She froze. "Town? I need supplies, coffee, flour. You're almost out, and I need a new axe head. The flood took mine." She looked at him, her eyes searching his. He was not leaving. He was running an errand. The domestic, simple act was a statement. He was staying. "You should not," she said softly. "They will. Talk. I've been talked about before." He looked at her. "Is there anything you need?" She shook her head. She went to the corner and retrieved a small, leather pouch. She tossed it to him. It was heavy. "This is coin from before. Use it. I'll pay you back." He said, "Just come back." She whispered, so low he almost missed it. He took her mule. The animal was sturdy and knew the way. The ride to Caliente took 2 hours. As he emerged from the canyon and onto the high plateau, he felt the world change. The silence of the canyon was replaced by the sigh of the open wind, and then the sight of the town. Caliente was a crosshatch of dusty streets, false-fronted buildings, and a church with a spire that was too tall for the town. It baked in the heat. As he rode down the main street, everything stopped. Men sitting on the porch of the general store stopped whittling. A woman shaking out a rug froze. The rug held in midair. Children stopped their game of hoops and just stared. Elias had been the stranger in town many times. This was different. This was not curiosity. This was fear, and it was hatred. He tied the mule in front of the general store. He nodded to the men. "Morning." They just stared. Their eyes were hard, judgmental. He walked inside. The store was dim, smelling of pickles and leather and mice. A thin, pale man stood behind the counter. "Help you?" the man asked, his hands not moving from the counter. "Need some flour, coffee, a pound of bacon, and a new axe head, a good one." The storekeep looked past him, out the window, at the mule. His eyes narrowed. "That's her mule." "It's a mule," Elias said flatly. "I'm borrowing it." "You're the one," the storekeep said. It was not a question. "You're the one staying with the bruja." "I'm staying with Mirabel," Elias said, his voice dropping. "He calls her by her name," a woman's voice hissed. A woman, who Elias had not seen, emerged from the back, her face a pinched knot of self-righteousness. "She's got him good." "Ma'am," Elias said, tipping his hat, though he felt no respect. Just then, the door opened, and a man in a black preacher's suit entered. He was tall, with a gaunt face and eyes that burned with a cold fire. He saw Elias, looked at the mule, and his lip curled. "So," the preacher boomed, his voice filling the small store, "the harlot of the canyon has taken in a stray. Be warned, son, you lie down with a witch. You wake up in hell." Elias turned, his hand balling into a fist. "I'd be careful what you call her. Preacher." The preacher laughed, a cold, sharp sound. "I call her what God has judged her to be, an unnatural woman, a curse on this good, God-fearing town." He took a step closer to Elias, his eyes full of venom. Then he turned, and with a show of great disgust, he spat on the floorboards, just shy of Elias's boot. "Get your goods, friend," the storekeep said, his voice suddenly nervous. "And be on your way. Your coin is no good here." "I'm paying," Elias said, throwing Mirabel's pouch on the counter. "I'm not asking for charity." He gathered the supplies. The woman hissing, "She'll drain the life from you. Boy, you'll be a husk by winter." Elias walked out, his back straight, the preacher's words echoing in his ears. He tied the supplies to the mule. He needed to know. He needed the whole story. He pushed open the batwing doors of the saloon. It was not yet noon, but the place was dark, and a few shadows nursed glasses at the bar. The bartender, an old man with a weary face, nodded. "Whiskey. Whiskey." Elias agreed. He downed the first in one gulp, the rot gut burning a clean path. "You're the talk," the bartender said, wiping a glass. "So I hear." Elias pushed the glass forward. "Another." An old-timer at the end of the bar, his face a roadmap of sun and bad liquor, cackled. "He's brave. I'll give him that. Brave or stupid, staying with La Maldita." "What's the whole story?" Elias asked, turning to the old man. "I've heard bits. I've heard stories." "Stories," the old man said. "Ain't stories. It's the truth. Paul Aguirre, that was her man. Good man. Strong, respected. He was to be married to her." The old man leaned in, his breath a cloud of sour mash. But she was always strange. Her family, they were different. Talk to the wind. After they drowned, she got stranger. Paul, he thought he could save her, thought his love could make her normal. He took a long drink. "But you can't save what's already spoiled." The night before they were to be wed, they had a fight, a bad one, shouting. People heard it. He said she was unnatural. She was not a godly woman. "What happened?" Elias asked, his gut tightening. "He lay with her," the old man whispered, his eyes wide. "He sinned, and she cursed him for it. He came out of her house that night, they say, his face pale, his eyes wide. He told his brother, 'She's a demon,' and he rode out, vanished, gone. The desert took him. He vanished after a fight." Elias said, "He vanished after she cursed him," the man insisted. "She's a succubus. She takes good men and breaks them. She killed her family with that flood. She cursed the crops, and she sent Paul Aguirre to his death. And you, friend," he said, tapping Elias on the chest. "You're next." Elias threw a coin on the bar and walked out. He rode the mule out of Caliente, the hatred of the town a physical weight on his shoulders. He was disturbed. The venom, the certainty, the joy they took in her condemnation. It was chilling. They had taken a woman's grief and twisted it into a monster. So they had something to fear and something to hate. He was disturbed, but he was undeterred. He thought of the preacher spitting. He thought of the woman hissing. He thought of the old man's superstitious, whiskey-soaked terror. And he compared it to Mirabel. He thought of her hands, steady, as she set the coyote's leg. He thought of her, screaming at the storm. A woman broken by a grief so large the town could not understand it. He thought of her body trembling, as she let him touch her scar. He cleared the ridge and started the descent into the canyon. The air grew still. The sound of the wind faded, replaced by the trickle of water and the call of a single hawk. It was peaceful. It was sane. He saw her. She was not at the cabin. She was on a high ledge, her back to him. She was singing. It was not a prayer. It was a low, wordless melody. A song she was singing to the wind, to the herbs she was gathering. She was a part of the canyon, a part of the stone and the sun. He saw her solitude. He saw her fierce tenderness. He saw the woman who had survived them all. He knew, in that moment, that he was lost. He was not a man who believed in curses, but he was a man who believed in what he saw. And he saw a woman he was, against all reason, beginning to love. He did not announce his return. He unsaddled the mule, put the supplies away. He saved the coffee for last. She came in as the sun was setting, her basket full. She stopped when she saw him. She looked at his face, searching. They talked. She said, "They talked," he agreed. "And now you will go." It was not a question. It was a statement of fact. He walked over to her. He took the bag of coffee beans from his saddlebag and pressed it into her hands. "I'll make the fire," he said. She stared at the coffee, then at him. He had not run. He had heard their poison, and he had come back. He had come home. That night, the air in the cabin was thick. The unresolved kiss, the terror of the town, his silent, stubborn return. It was all there. He sat on his pallet. She sat on hers. The fire burned between them. "They think I'm a demon," she said to the flames. "They're fools." He said, "They say I killed him. Paul, they say I cursed him." And he vanished. "I know what they say." She turned to him, her eyes black and deep, glittering with unshed tears. "And what do you say, Elias Granger?" He got up. He crossed the small space between them and knelt in front of her. He took her hands. They were calloused, stained with herbs, and trembling. "I say," he said, his voice low, "that I have never met a woman so strong, or so alone." He touched her face, his thumb tracing the sharp line of her cheekbone. "I am not Paul Aguirre. I am not the town, and I am not leaving." She looked at him, her defenses crumbling. The town had given her their hatred. He was giving her his loyalty. She leaned in and kissed him. This was not the first kiss. This was not rain and comfort and salt. This was fire and earth and a decade of hunger. It was a desperate, drowning kiss. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close. Her body was lean and strong against his. He felt her fingers dig into his back, her nails scraping his skin. This was not a surrender. This was a collision. It was emotional. It was physical. It was two people who had been starved of touch, of kindness, of hope, and were now, finally, feasting. It was the desperate, vulnerable act of choosing life. He tasted the herbs on her skin, felt the pulse drumming in her throat. She was real. She was not a witch, not a curse. She was a woman. After, they lay on her pallet, their bodies slick with sweat. The fire burned down to embers. The silence returned, but it was a different silence. It was the silence of after. He was half asleep when he felt her begin to shake. He turned. She was crying, not the violent sobs of the storm, but a quiet, hopeless weeping. "Mirabelle?" She looked at him, her face a mask of old, familiar terror. "They were all right," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I am cursed. No, don't say that. It's true," she sobbed, clutching his hand. "He's gone. Paul is gone. My family is gone. And now I've done this. She looked at him, her eyes broken. "Now you'll vanish too." Elias did not vanish. He woke the next morning, the sun streaming in, and the first thing he saw was Mirabelle, already awake, watching him. The terror was still in her eyes, a faint, bruised shadow, but he was still there. He had not been swallowed by the night, nor erased by her touch. He reached out and tucked a strand of her black hair behind her ear. "I'm here," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "You are here," she whispered, as if testing the reality of the words. A new rhythm began, one born not of necessity and healing, but of choice. The days that followed were quiet, but it was a different quiet. It was not the silence of isolation. It was the peace of partnership. Elias, who had spent his adult life moving, found the urge to flee had finally, unaccountably, left him. The canyon, which had been her fortress and his refuge, was starting to feel like a home. He talked of the barn. The flood had weakened the main support beam, and the roof was a sieve. "We could fix it," he said one evening over rabbit stew. "Fix it proper, before the winter. We could get a milk cow, maybe keep the mule in there, out of the wind." Mirabelle stopped eating, her spoon halfway to her mouth. We The word hung in the air, solid and warm. "The barn has been broken for 5 years. Doesn't mean it has to stay broken," he said. "I'll need to find some good timber down by the old wash, and I'll need a proper saw. But we can do it." She did not say yes, she did not say no. But the next morning, she showed him a small, hidden box that held a handful of coins, enough for a saw and nails. "There is a man, 2 canyons over," she said. "He trades. He does not listen to the town." The work settled him. He was a man who understood the logic of wood, the honesty of a straight line. As he worked, rebuilding the foundations of the ruined barn, he felt like he was rebuilding something inside himself. And as he worked, she talked. It happened in pieces. She would bring him water at midday, and as he drank, she would stand, watching the horizon, and a memory would surface, like a stone in a dry riverbed. "My abuela," she said one day, her voice soft. "My grandmother. She taught me the herbs. She would sing to them. You know, she said they would not give their medicine unless you asked with respect." She showed him the scar on her palm, a pale crescent. "She gave me this. I was 6 years old. I tried to grab a root from the fire. She said, 'The fire teaches. Let it.' She held my hand, and she did not let me pull away until I understood." Elias stopped his work, listening. "She knew things," Mirabelle continued, her eyes distant, lost in a time before this canyon. "She knew when the rain would come. She knew when a baby was breech. The padre, he hated her. He called her what they call me." "A healer," Elias said, his voice firm. She looked at him, a small, grateful smile touching her lips. "A healer," he learned of her childhood. In a valley to the south that was green, not brown, a place with a river that did not rage, he learned of her people, how they had been on that land for generations, until men with paper and guns had come, claiming it. "They had a map," she said, her voice tight with an old, cold anger. "The map said the land was theirs. My father, he showed them the graves of his grandfathers. They told him the map was more important." He learned of her father's death. It was not a grand, Western tragedy. It was a simple, sad story. "His heart," she said. "The land was gone, the green was gone from his world." And so he just stopped. He lay down one afternoon and did not get up. That was how they had come north. She and her mother and her brother, following a rumor of work, becoming refugees in their own land. They were ghosts, looking for a place to rest. And the world had offered them nothing but this dry, hard canyon. Elias listened to it all. He took in her stories, her grief, her quiet rage. He saw the woman she had been, the girl who sang to plants and the woman whose land was stolen. He packed her history around the foundation of the barn, mixing it with the adobe, making it a part of the structure. They began to plant. The flood had taken most of the summer garden, but the soil, newly turned and rich with silt, was ready. "Winter crops," she said, producing a small tin of seeds. "Turnips, kale. They will grow in the cold, if we are smart." They worked side by side, their hands in the same earth. He dug the furrows, his strength making the work fast. She followed, crumbling the soil, placing each seed with a care that was almost reverent, murmuring to them in her mix of Spanish and the older, softer words of her grandmother, their bond, forged in crisis and passion, now tempered in the quiet routine of daily life. Felt sacred. It was a fragile thing. Elias knew it. He knew that the world, the one just over the ridge, was still there. The town of Caliente, the preacher, the whispers, La Maldita. They had built a small, peaceful island, but it was in the middle of a poisoned sea. He wanted to give her something to mark this time. This us. He had no coin, no silver, but he had his hands, and he had his knife. He had found a piece of bone while digging, the bleached, smooth curve of a rib, probably from a deer. It was old, polished by the sand and sun. He sat by the fire for 3 nights, after she was asleep, carving, his rough, calloused hands, so used to the axe handle and the rope. Learned a new gentleness. He carved it into the shape of a feather, a hawk's feather, like the one he always saw circling the canyon. A guardian. He drilled a small hole in the top using the point of his knife and strung it on a simple leather thong. He gave it to her at dawn, on a morning so cold their breath plumed. She was washing her face in the basin, and he came up behind her. Mirabelle. She turned, her face still damp. He held it out, the bone pendant resting in his rough palm. It's just a thing. She looked at it, her hand rising to her mouth. She did not cry. Her eyes widened, and he saw a brightness, a vulnerable, aching joy that was more moving than any tear. She did not take it from him. She simply stood still, turning, her back to him, her hair pushed to one side, a silent request. His fingers fumbled with the leather knot. He tied it around her neck. The white bone rested against the warm, tan skin of her throat. A mark, a claim, a promise. She turned back to him, her hand closing around the feather. She did not speak. She rose on her toes and kissed him, a deep, slow kiss that was full of the morning, and the earth, and the winter crops, and the promise of a shared future. It was, perhaps, the last truly peaceful day they would ever have. The sound came a week later. Hoofbeats. Not a single rider, like Silas the trader. Not the shuffling of a tired mule. This was the sound of purpose, the sound of men, many men. Elias was splitting wood by the new barn wall, his shirt off in the midday sun. Mirabelle was in the garden, her back to the canyon entrance. He heard it first. His head snapped up. He knew that sound. It was the sound of trouble. Mirabelle, he said, his voice low, but it carried in the still air. Inside, now. She did not question him. She saw his face. She dropped her basket and ran. He grabbed his axe. It was a poor substitute for the gun he no longer had. They burst from the canyon mouth. 6 riders, fanning out as if expecting an ambush. They were dark silhouettes against the bright, dusty sky. They pulled up, their horses snorting and stamping, just 20 yards from the cabin. Elias stood in front of the door, his axe held loosely at his side. Mirabelle was a shadow in the doorway behind him. The men were from the town. He recognized the pale, pinched face of the storekeep and the gaunt, burning eyes of the preacher. They held rifles, but they were not the ones in charge. The man at the front was older, with a graying mustache and a tin star pinned to his vest. Sheriff Raleigh. He looked tired, and he looked unhappy. "Ma'am," the sheriff said, touching the brim of his hat toward Mirabelle. "Granger." "Sheriff," Elias said. "Long ride for a social call." "This ain't social," Raleigh said, his eyes scanning the homestead, taking in the new fence, the garden, the half-built barn. His gaze lingered on Elias, bare-chested and defiant. "We've had a situation in town. Town business ain't my concern." Elias said, "It is now." The sheriff looked tired. "A man rode in 3 days ago. A man we all thought was dead." Elias felt Mirabelle's hand grip the back of his shirt. He knew, before the sheriff even said the name. "Paul Aguirre," the sheriff said, and the name dropped into the canyon like a stone. The riders parted. A man moved his horse forward. This was not the ghost of a story. This was flesh and blood. He was tall, like Elias, but built thicker, his shoulders straining his dusty black coat. His face was hard, sun-scorched and cruel. A long, white scar, a twin to the one on Mirabelle's ribs, cut down from his left temple, pulling his eye into a permanent, angry squint. His eyes. Elias had never seen eyes so empty of light. They were black, and they were filled with a cold, patient hatred. He stared at Mirabelle, and a slow, terrible smile spread across his face. "Hello, querida," Paul Aguirre said, his voice a gravelly drawl. "You look surprised. Did you think a little pig sticker in a fall could kill a man like me?" Mirabelle made a sound, a choked, strangled gasp. It was the sound of a nightmare made real. Elias stepped forward, planting his feet. "You're not welcome here. Get on your horse and ride out." Paul's gaze shifted to Elias. He looked him up and down, taking in the muscles, the sweat, the possessive stance in front of the door. Paul laughed. It was a sound like dry rocks scraping together. "So," Paul said, nodding at Elias. "This is the stray she picked up. She always did like taking in wounded things. You'll learn. Boy, her touch, it costs." "That's enough, Paul," the sheriff said, though his voice lacked conviction. "It's not enough," Paul roared, his smile vanishing, replaced by a mask of pure venom. He pointed a trembling finger at Mirabelle. "That witch, she did this to me. She put her poison in my cup. She took my money, and she sold me like cattle." "That's a lie," Elias said, his knuckles white on the axe handle. "Is it?" Paul sneered. "I woke up in a Laredo bordello, 100 miles from here, with no memory, no name. And this," he jabbed his finger at the scar on his face, "sold to a madam for $50. She told them I was a gambler who wouldn't pay. It took me 10 years of hell, 10 years working my way back, one godforsaken job at a time just to get here, to see her again." His story was wild. It was insane, but it was detailed. The storekeep and the preacher were nodding, their faces grim, believing every word. "She's a witch," Paul said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "She poisoned me. She stole my soul for a time, and she tried to kill me. She must answer for it." "Mirabelle?" the sheriff asked, looking at the silent woman in the doorway. Mirabelle was shaking, her face ashen. She was trapped, frozen by the man she thought she had killed. Elias spoke for her. "She's not answering to the likes of you. You heard me? Leave." "I'm not leaving without her," Paul said. "You're not taking her," Elias countered. He raised the axe, just slightly. The riders raised their rifles. The click-click of hammers being cocked was deafening in the silence. "Stand down, son," Sheriff Raleigh said, his hand on his own pistol. "Don't be a fool. I'm not here to start a war. I'm here to stop one. Paul has made a formal accusation, attempted murder, theft, witchcraft." "Witchcraft," Elias spat. "You're listening to this?" "I'm listening to a man who was wronged," the preacher shouted, his eyes blazing. "The day of judgment is here. Quiet, Reverend." Raleigh snapped. He looked at Elias. "I'm giving you a choice. Granger, you and the woman. You will ride back to Caliente with us. You will stand in my office, and we will sort this out." Hearing. She tells her side. He tells his. We get to the bottom of it." "And if we don't?" Elias asked. "Then I am bound by law to deputize these men," Raleigh said, gesturing to the eager, angry faces. "And we will take her, by force, and you, for harboring a fugitive and obstructing justice, will be arrested or shot." He looked at Elias, man to man. "This ain't a threat. It's the law, such as it is. Don't make me do this, son. Don't die here for her." Elias looked at Paul, at his triumphant, hateful eyes. He looked at the sheriff, a weak man trying to hold back a flood. He looked at Mirabelle, who was staring at Paul as if he were a corpse, her face a mask of stone. He lowered the axe. "Tomorrow," Elias said, his voice choked with rage. "We will be there at noon." Raleigh nodded, relieved. "Noon, don't be late." Paul was not happy. "You're just leaving? Sheriff, she'll run." "She's got nowhere to run." "Paul," Raleigh said, turning his horse. "It's over. You've won. Now let's go." Paul held his stare on Mirabelle for a long, agonizing moment. "This ain't over, Maldita, not until you're swinging from a rope." He spat on the ground, the same ground Elias and Mirabelle had planted with winter seeds. Then he wheeled his horse and galloped away. The others followed, a cloud of righteous dust. The silence that descended was heavier, more toxic than any that had come before. Elias turned. Mirabelle had not moved. She was still staring at the spot where Paul had been, her hand at her throat, her fingers clutching the bone pendant. "Mirabelle," he said gently, "go inside. Let's—" She turned and ran. Not into the cabin. She ran toward the canyon wall, scrambling up the path, her feet slipping. "Mirabelle!" He dropped the axe and ran after her. He caught her on the high ledge, the one where she sang to the wind. She was backed against the rock, her eyes wild, her chest heaving. She looked like the trapped coyote pup. "He's alive," she gasped, her voice raw. "He's alive, he's alive. I know, I'm here. It's all right." "No!" she screamed, pushing him as he approached. "It is not all right. You heard him, you heard them. They're coming." "We'll go," he said, trying to calm her. "We'll go to the sheriff, just like he said. We'll tell him the truth. He'll listen." "The truth?" she laughed. And it was the sound he had heard during the storm, the sound of breaking. "The truth? You want the truth? Elias Granger, you who came here and built my fence and carved me a thing?" She ripped the pendant from her neck, the leather thong snapping, and threw it at his feet. The white bone lay in the red dust between them. Elias flinched as if she had struck him. "You want the truth?" she spat, her words a torrent. "There is no bordello. There is no poison. There was no sale." "Mirabelle, stop." "No. You want to know what happened? You want to know the story they don't tell in the saloon?" She was pacing now, a caged, frantic energy. "He did have a fight with me. He was drunk. He was always drunk by the end. He was not the man I agreed to marry. He was jealous. He hated my healing. He said it was the devil's work. He said I was unclean." She was shaking, reliving it, the words pouring out of her. "That night, the night he vanished. He came here, to this cabin. He was mad. He said the wedding was off. He said no man would marry a She choked on the word. "A witch. He said he would. Cleanse me. He said he would burn this place, and me with it." She wrapped her arms around herself. "I fought him. I told him to leave. He hit me. He hit me. And he said if he could not have me, no one would. He said he would take what was his." Elias's blood ran cold. "Mirabelle, he was strong," she whispered, her eyes hollow. "He ripped my dress. He... She pointed to the scar on her ribs, the one he had touched. "He did this, with his knife. He said he would mark me as his." Elias took a step, but she held up a hand. "I fought," she said, her voice a monotone. "I had my skinning knife, the one I used for the rabbits. It was on the table. I grabbed it. He was on top of me. I stabbed him." The canyon was silent. Even the hawk was gone. "I stabbed him," she repeated, her voice dead. "In the back, I pushed. He stopped. He rolled off me. He looked surprised. He looked at me, and he said my name. And then he just lay there." Elias was shaking. "He felt sick. I sat there," she said, "for hours. The storm came, just like the other one. I sat there, and he just lay there. I thought he was dead. I was glad. I was glad he was dead. I dragged him," she said, her voice a rasp. "I dragged him out, into the arroyo. The storm it was a flood. I rolled him in. I let the water take him, just like it took my family. I let the water wash him away." She finally stopped, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She looked at Elias, her eyes begging him. "I left him for dead," she whispered. "I thought he was gone. I killed him. Elias, I killed him. And I prayed he was dead." Elias stood there, the full weight of her words, of her life, crashing down on him. The doubt was a cold, sick knot in his stomach. She had lied. She had lied by silence. She had let him believe the town's ghost stories. And the truth was so much worse. The truth was brutal. It was bloody. She had killed a man, left him for dead. He looked at the broken pendant at his feet. All his work, the barn, the garden, it was all built on a lie, on a grave she had dug. "Elias," she whispered. He could not read his face. He was shaken. He was disgusted. He thought of Paul's face, the cold, cruel eyes, the scar. He said he would mark me. He thought of the town, so eager to believe in a witch, but not in a woman's terror. doubt was there. But so was loyalty. A fierce, stubborn loyalty that had taken root in his chest, right alongside the turnips and the kale. He took a deep breath. He bent down. His hand was trembling. He picked up the bone pendant from the dust. He did not look at it. He just closed his fist around it. He walked over to her. She cringed, expecting a blow, or for him to turn and walk away. He stopped in front of her. He said nothing. He just looked at her, his eyes tracing the old, faint lines of terror on her face. Then, very slowly, he reached out his hand, the one not holding the pendant, and he touched the scar on her ribs, this time on her skin, where her shirt was torn. He did this, Elias said. It was not a question. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. He tried to kill you, Elias said. She nodded again. You defended yourself. You defended yourself, he said again, his voice like iron. He had his answer. He had made his choice. He was not a man of gray. He was a man of simple, stark loyalties. He was not on the side of the man who held the knife. He was on the side of the woman who was left with the scar. He stepped into her, closing the distance. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her against his chest. His grip not gentle, but possessive, crushing. She buried her face in his neck. You are staying? She wept. You are not leaving. I'm not leaving, he said, his voice a low growl. I am not Paul, and I am not the town. Let them come. Let them all come. He tilted her head back. His fingers tangled in her hair. He kissed her. It was not the kiss of comfort. It was not the kiss of passion. It was a kiss of defiance. It was a kiss that tasted of blood and dust and fury. It was raw. It was violent. It was two people, pushed to the absolute edge, choosing not to fall, but to turn and fight. It was a biting, desperate, almost painful kiss. It was a moment of pure, raw hunger. A claim. He was marking her just as Paul had, but he was marking her as his, as alive. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathless. The air had changed. The fear was still there, but it had a new, sharp edge. It was shared. We go to town, he said, his voice hard. She nodded, her eyes fierce, her tears drying. Together. Together. He picked up the axe. She went into the cabin. They had one night to prepare for the reckoning. He did not know if they were riding to a hearing or to their own execution. He only knew he would not be riding alone. The ride to Caliente was silent. The only sound, the steady plod of the mule's hooves and the creak of Elias's borrowed saddle. He had insisted she ride the mule. He walked beside her, his hand never far from the handle of the axe, which he had tucked into his belt. They had left the canyon at dawn, a fortress of two, marching toward an army. Mirabelle's face was a mask of stone, her eyes fixed on the dusty road ahead. She wore the bone pendant Elias had carved, the leather thong dark against her throat. He had found it on the ledge and tied it back around her neck himself, the knot a silent, stubborn vow. It was exactly noon when they reached the main street. The sun was a white-hot hammer, beating down on the dusty, false-fronted buildings. The town was not asleep. It was waiting. As they passed the first house, the doors and windows filled with faces. They were not greeted. They were watched. The silence was a living thing, thick and hateful. Elias felt the eyes on his back, on Mirabelle's, like the crawling of insects. A small boy, no older than 5, ran out from an alley, pointed, and shouted, "The witch! The witch is here!" His mother yanked him back, slapping her hand over his mouth, her own eyes wide with fear and loathing. By the time they reached the center of town, in front of the sheriff's office, the street behind them had filled. It was not a crowd, it was a mob. Men from the saloon, women from the general store, all of them drawn by the scent of judgment. They kept their distance, a half-circle of condemnation, but their murmurs were a low, angry buzz. Sheriff Raleigh stepped out of his office, his face grim. He looked relieved that they had come, and terrified that they had— "They're here!" A voice boomed. The preacher, his black coat flapping, pushed through the crowd, his face alight with a terrible, righteous fire. "The demon has returned to the place of her sin. She has come with her new consort." Paul Aguirre was right behind him. His cruel, scarred face was lit with triumph. He pointed at Mirabelle, who sat frozen on the mule. "There she is, the witch who tried to murder me. Are you going to let her walk free, Sheriff, or are we going to see real justice?" "Justice! Justice!" The crowd picked up the chant, the sound growing louder. "That's enough," Raleigh shouted, his voice cracking. He drew his pistol and fired it into the air. The sound was flat and shocking. The crowd flinched, falling silent. "This is not a hanging. This is a hearing. In my office, now." "Your office?" Paul sneered. "It's too small. Sheriff, we all want to hear this. We all have a right to the truth." "Aye," the preacher agreed. "Let the town bear witness. Let us bring this darkness into the light." Raleigh was a weak man, and the mob knew it. He looked at Elias, at Mirabelle, his expression one of weary defeat. "The saloon, then, it's big enough, but it will be orderly, or by God, I'll arrest every last one of you for inciting a riot." He herded them, a reluctant shepherd, toward the saloon. Elias helped Mirabelle down from the mule. Her hand was ice cold. He squeezed it once, hard. "I'm here," he whispered. She nodded, her eyes still locked in that stony, far-off place. The saloon was hot and smelled of stale beer and sweat. The townsfolk packed in, standing on tables, filling the back, their faces a pale, judgmental blur. Raleigh cleared a space at the front. He set a table for himself. This was his makeshift court. "All right," Raleigh said, pounding his gavel, a whiskey bottle, on the table. "Let's have this. Paul Aguirre, you made the accusation. You speak first." Paul stood, reveling in the attention. He was an actor on a stage he had built. He told his story again, but this time with more. He painted Mirabelle as a seductress, a demon who had lured him with her unnatural beauty. He told them of the poisoned drink she had given him, of a strange-smelling smoke in her cabin. "She wanted my land," Paul lied, his voice thick with false emotion. "When I refused to sign it over before the wedding, she changed. She chanted in that devil's tongue her grandmother taught her. She tried to bewitch me, and when I fought her, she drugged me. She stabbed me in my sleep." A collective gasp went through the crowd. "And then," Paul continued, his voice dropping, "she sold me to men, godless men, who took me to Texas. I woke up in a pit of sin, my memory gone, sold for her profit." "Liar!" Elias shouted, his voice echoing in the tense room. "Order!" Raleigh yelled. "Granger, you'll have your turn. Paul, you done?" "I am," Paul said, turning to the crowd. "But I ask you, how many others, how many misfortunes has this town suffered since she first crawled out of that flood? Ask yourselves." "He's right," the preacher yelled, stepping forward. I'll speak to her witchcraft." And he did. He brought up everything. The failed crops on the Jensen farm, which bordered the canyon. "He saw her," the preacher cried, pointing at a nervous, pale farmer in the crowd. "Saw her walking his fence line at midnight, singing." I saw something," the farmer stammered, afraid to deny it. The preacher brought up the barn fire, 3 years ago, that had killed 2 horses. "It was a dry night," he thundered. "No lightning. But a trapper swore he smelled sage and sulfur, the witch's own perfume, on the wind that night." He brought up the stillbirth. Old Man Hemlock's wife, who was in the back, began to weep. "She looked in the window," the woman cried out, her voice a shriek of old pain. "My baby was fine until she looked in my window." The room was a tinderbox, and Paul and the preacher were holding the matches. The air was thick with superstition, with old griefs given a new, convenient target. "That is enough," Elias said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. He stepped forward, standing beside Raleigh's table. He was not a man of many words, but he was a man of presence, and his cold, steady anger silenced the room more effectively than the sheriff's gavel. "You're listening to ghosts," Elias said. his eyes scanning the crowd. "You're listening to a drunkard's lies and a preacher's fears. You want to talk about what happened? Then let her speak. Or are you too afraid of a woman's voice?" He turned to Mirabel, who stood alone, a pariah. He held out his hand. "Mirabel, tell them." She looked at his hand, then at his face. He was not just standing with her. He was standing for her. She took a breath, and the stone mask cracked. She took his hand, walked to the front, and faced them all. She let go of his hand. She would do this herself. "My name is Mirabel," she said, her voice quiet, but it carried. It was not the voice of a witch. It was the voice of a woman. "I am not a demon. I am not a curse," she told her side. She spoke of her family, of the flood that took them, of the town that took her in, and of the whispers that started the next day. "You were kind, at first," she said, her eyes finding the women in the crowd. "You gave me a bed, but you never gave me peace. When your milk soured, you looked at me. When your child sickened, you pulled them away from me." She turned her gaze to Paul. The room held its breath. "I was to be married to Paul Aguirre," she said, her voice clear and cold. I loved him, or I loved the man I thought he was, but he changed. The closer we came to the wedding, the more he drank, the more he hated. He grew jealous, he grew violent." Paul's face was white with fury. "She lies." "I am speaking," Mirabel said, and her authority silenced him. "He did not like my healing. He did not like that my grandmother taught me the herbs. He called it the devil's work. He wanted my land, the small patch in the canyon my father had claimed. He said it should be his. I would not sign it." She told them of the last night. She did not spare them the truth, not the bloody, awful truth. "He came to my cabin. He was drunk. He said the wedding was off. He said he would cleanse me. He hit me. He pulled a knife." She touched the bone pendant at her throat. "He said he would mark me. He did." She unbuttoned the top of her blouse, her hands steady, and pulled the collar aside, just enough to show the top of the white, puckered scar on her ribs. The women in the room gasped. This was a truth they understood. This was not witchcraft. This was a man's violence. "I fought him," Mirabel said, her voice raw. He was going to kill me. I had a knife, a skinning knife. I stabbed him. I stabbed him to make him stop." The saloon was dead silent. "I thought he was dead," she whispered, the tears finally coming. "I was alone. I was terrified. A storm came. I dragged him to the arroyo. I let the flood take him. I left him for dead." She looked at the crowd, her eyes blazing with a decade of pain. "I did not poison him. I did not sell him. I survived him. And for that, for surviving, you have called me a curse." The town was split. You could feel it. The men, their faces hard, still stood with Paul. He was a man, wronged by a woman, and the details were inconvenient. But the women were watching Mirabel. They were watching her with a new, dawning horror. They saw her scars. They heard her voice. "She's a whore, a lying killer," Paul choked out, his story crumbling under the weight of her simple, brutal truth. "No," a voice said from the back. It was not loud, but it was firm. The crowd parted. An old woman, her face a web of wrinkles, her hands stained with the signs of her trade, walked forward. It was Ida, the town midwife. She had delivered half the people in this room. She stood next to Mirabel. "This woman is no killer," Ida said, her voice sharp. "And she is no witch. I am a woman of God, and I am a woman of the earth, and I know a healer when I see one." She turned to the crowd. "You all remember the winter of '78, the lung fever, when my own grandson, little Thomas, was dying?" Her eyes found the preacher. "You prayed over him, Reverend. You said it was God's will, and he was turning blue." She turned back to Mirabel. "I was desperate. I rode to this woman's canyon. I had heard the stories. I was afraid. But I was more afraid of burying my boy. I begged her. She came. She came in the snow. And she did not ask for coin. She brought her roots and her teas. She sat with him for 2 nights. She boiled water, and she made him breathe the steam. She sang to him. Ida's voice broke. And he lived. My Thomas lived. She did not curse him. She saved him, when no one else would, when God would not. The preacher recoiled as if struck. Blasphemy! It is the truth, Ida said. And you? She pointed at the woman who had wept over the stillbirth. You blame her for your baby. I was there. Your baby was breeched for 2 days. It was God's tragedy, not this woman's sin. The room was in chaos. Men were shouting at women. The preacher was yelling about devils. Paul, seeing his support waver, his story collapse, felt a primal, desperate rage. He saw Elias, the center of it all, the man who had stood by her, the man who had brought this all to a head. This is his fault, Paul roared, pointing at Elias. He's bewitched, too. She's opened her legs for him, and now he speaks with her tongue. He's as damned as she is. Elias had been silent long enough. He had let Mirabel speak. He had let Ida speak. But this, he would not let stand. He moved, faster than anyone thought he could. He crossed the 2 feet between them, his fist a hammer. He did not punch Paul's face. He punched him in the throat. Paul collapsed, gagging, his eyes bulging, his hands clutching his neck. His liar's voice silenced. Elias stood over him, breathing hard. You will not, he said, his voice a low, guttural growl. Speak of her that way again. The room exploded. 2 of Paul's friends grabbed Elias from behind, pinning his arms. Sheriff Raleigh, his authority completely gone, finally acted. He slammed his pistol on the table. That's it. It's over. The hearing is done. He pointed at Elias. Granger, you're under arrest. Assault. Assault? Elias laughed, a bitter, angry sound. You punched him in front of me. I got no choice, Raleigh yelled, furious and out of his depth. You'll be in the cell overnight to cool off. The rest of you, get out. Go home. It's over. He grabbed Elias by the arm. Don't fight me, son. It'll only be worse. Elias did not fight. He looked at Mirabel. Her face was a mask of terror. He had left her. He had been taken, just as she had feared. Elias, she cried, reaching for him. I'm all right, he said, as the sheriff dragged him away. Go to the hotel. Lock the door. Do not go back to the canyon. But, lock the door, he yelled, before Raleigh pushed him through the office and into the small, dark, stone cell at the back. The heavy, iron-barred door slammed shut with a sound of finality. Mirabel was left alone, in the saloon, with the mob. The crowd filtered out, their anger not satisfied, but frustrated. They stared at her as they left. The women, some with pity, some with confusion. The men with a cold, hard hatred. Paul was helped away by his friends, his face purple, his eyes murderous. He looked at Mirabel and mouthed one word. Tonight, she was alone, utterly. Ida, the midwife, touched her arm. You come stay with me, child. You're not safe. But Mirabel shook her head, pulling away. Thank you, but I must go. She walked out of the saloon, into the harsh afternoon light. She felt the stares from every window. She went to the general store, the same one that had hissed at Elias. The storekeep's wife was there. Mirabel laid her last few coins on the counter. A box of cartridges, she said. For a .38. The woman looked at her, her eyes cold. We don't have any. Mirabel knew she was lying. She saw the box on the shelf. She walked behind the counter, pushed the woman aside, took the box, and left the coins. She walked out, her back straight. She went to the hotel. Elias had told her to, but she knew she could not stay. The town was a prison, and the canyon was her only home. But Paul's whispered threat. Tonight, he would come for her. He would come to the canyon. He would finish what he started. She had to leave. Not just the town. She had to leave forever. She had to go north, disappear, become the ghost they all thought she was. She went to the livery. Her steps hurried. She saddled the mule. She had a few supplies, a blanket, the cartridges. It was enough. As she was tying the last knot, she felt a presence. She turned. It was the preacher. "Running, demon?" he hissed, his face a mask of holy contempt. "You cannot run from the judgment of the Lord. Get out of my way," she said, her voice tired. "He will find you," the preacher said, his eyes gleaming, "and he will cast you into the lake of fire, just like we will." He stepped aside, and she saw it, hanging from the rafters of the livery. Right above her mule was a noose, a freshly tied, perfectly made hangman's noose. She stared at it. The room swam. This was their answer. The hearing, the truth, her scars. None of it mattered. They had already judged her. She turned and fled. She did not take the mule. She just ran. She ran, past the houses, past the staring faces. She ran until her lungs burned. She ran away from the town, but not toward the canyon. She ran to the only other place she knew, the only other place that felt as broken as she was. The sun was setting. The cell was black. Elias was pacing, his knuckles raw. He had heard the whispers, the threats. He knew she was in danger. He heard a key scrape in the lock. He tensed. The door creaked open. It was not Raleigh. It was a woman, small and gray-haired. She was holding a plate of food and the cell keys. "Mrs. Raleigh," Elias said, stunned. "Ida is my sister," the sheriff's wife whispered, her face pale. "She told me what happened. She told me what she saw." She pushed the plate at him. "Eat, quickly." "I'm not hungry. I have to get to Mirabelle." "You'll do her no good, starved or shot," she said, her voice firm. She unlocked the cell door. "My husband? He's a good man, but he's a weak one. He's afraid of Paul Aguirre. He's afraid of the preacher. He's drinking in the saloon, trying to find the courage to let you go in the morning." "I can't wait for morning." "I know." She pushed the keys into his hand. "The back door. My horse is tied out there, a black mare. She's fast. Go to your woman." Elias grabbed her, his hand on her shoulder, his gratitude overwhelming. "Why?" "Because, Mrs., Raleigh said, her eyes filling with tears. "Ida told me what that monster did to her. I've lived with a weak man. I know what a cruel one looks like. Go, do not let him win." Elias did not wait. He was out the back door in a second, the cool night air hitting him. He found the mare, mounted her bareback, and dug his heels in. He did not go to the hotel. He knew, with a sick certainty, she would not be there. He rode to the livery. The mule was there, saddled, but Mirabelle was gone. Then he saw it, the noose, swinging in the draft. His blood ran cold with a rage he had never known. He would kill them. He would kill them all. He rode out of the town, not toward the canyon. He knew she was running, fleeing. He had to stop her. He knew where she would go, the place she had told him about, in one of her stories, the place her family had first camped before the flood, the place where the first church had stood before the town was even built. The ruins. He found her there, in the skeleton of an old adobe church. The roof was gone, the walls crumbling, the moonlight streaming in, painting everything in shades of silver and black. She was huddled by the collapsed altar, her body shaking, her head in her hands. "Mirabelle," he said, his voice raw. She looked up, her face streaked with dust and tears. "You're free," she whispered. "I'm free," he said, sliding off the horse. He walked toward her. "Go," she said, her voice breaking. "Leave, Elias. Take the horse. Ride north. Forget this town. Forget me. They left a noose. They will not stop. They will hunt me, and they will hunt you for being with me." "I'm not going anywhere," he said. "You must," she cried, getting to her feet. "This is my fault. I brought this. I brought the curse. I am the curse. Paul was right. Everything I touch, it dies. I killed my family. I killed Paul. And I've killed you." She was hysterical, broken by the town, by the noose, by his jailing. He argued with her. It was a bitter, desperate argument in the moonlight. Two shadows in a ruin. He was angry. He was terrified. He was not leaving. "I won't let you," she screamed, pounding on his chest. "I will not be the one who kills you. Go!" He grabbed her wrists, his grip like iron, holding her still. "No." "Why?" She sobbed, her fight gone, collapsing against him. "Why are you here? Why are you staying? I am a killer. I am a lie. I am nothing." He held her, his arms wrapped around her, his face buried in her hair. He let her cry, let the last of the poison, the last of the town's hatred, pour out of her. When she was quiet, just a tremor in his arms, he pulled her back so she could see his face in the moonlight. "I don't care," he said, his voice thick. "What?" "I don't care who you were," he said, his words simple and true. "I don't care what you did. I don't care that you killed him. He deserved it. I don't care about the town. I don't care about the preacher or the noose." He touched her face, his rough thumb wiping away a tear. "I only care who you are with me, and you are everything." She stared at him, the full, complete, and unmovable truth of his words settling over her. He was not staying in spite of who she was. He was staying because of who she was. She took a deep, shuddering breath. The fear was still there, but it was not just hers anymore. It was theirs. "They will come for us," she whispered. "Paul, he will come to the canyon. He will not wait." "I know," Elias said. "He won't stop. Not until one of us is in the ground." She looked at him, her eyes as dark and hard as the night. The terror was gone, replaced by something else. A cold, hard resilience. The resilience of the desert. The resilience of her grandmother. "We cannot run," she said. "We will not run." He agreed. She pulled away from him, just enough to stand on her own. She looked at the moon, at the ruins. "All my life," she whispered, "I have been running, or hiding. I let them blame me. I let them call me a curse. I hid in the shadows." She turned back to him, and in the moonlight, he saw a fire in her eyes he had never seen before. It was the fire of her grandmother. It was the fire of the woman who had survived it all. "Let them try to burn us," Mirabelle whispered, her voice like steel. "This time, I'll burn back." They returned to the canyon under the cover of darkness, riding misses. Raleigh's black mare, two shadows against the rock. The ruined church was 5 miles behind them. The town of Caliente, a glowing, hateful ember to the south. Elias had the woman's horse, but he had no gun, only his axe and a cold, hard knot of fury in his gut. Mirabelle, silent beside him, clutched the box of .38 caliber cartridges she had taken from the general store. The homestead was not a refuge. It was a trap. They both knew it. "He will not wait for morning," Elias said, his voice flat. He slid off the mare and tied her in a low, hidden alcove, well away from the cabin. "He'll come tonight. He'll use the dark. He'll want to finish this before the sheriff sobers up." "This is not your fight, Elias," Mirabelle said, her voice hollow. It was the last time she would ever offer him an escape. "You are my fight," he said, his voice so low and certain it startled her. "Now, where is it?" She understood. She led him inside the small, dark cabin. From beneath her pallet, wrapped in an oilcloth, she pulled a long, heavy rifle, a Winchester. "My father's. I have not fired it in 10 years. I did not know if the cartridges I bought, He bought .38 caliber, Elias said, checking the box. "This is a 44-40. They won't fit." He cursed, a low, bitter sound. "He has a rifle. I have an axe." "No," Mirabelle said, her voice finding its steel. She opened a small wooden box he had never seen. Inside, nestled in dry cotton, were 10 tarnished brass cartridges. "My father's last box. There are only 10. Elias took them, his hand brushing hers. 10 is enough." He also found an old pistol, a heavy Colt, the one she had bought the cartridges for. He checked the action. It was stiff, but it worked. He loaded 5 rounds, leaving one chamber empty, and handed it to her. "Do you know how to use it?" "I know how to skin a rabbit," she said, her voice dark. "I know how to stab a man. I will learn to shoot." They worked. There was no more talk of running, no more tears. Their fear had burned away, leaving only a cold, hard resolve. They were a single unit, their movements economical, their words few. "He'll come from the ridge," Elias said, scanning the canyon lip. "He'll want the high ground, to shoot down, and he'll send men to the door." He moved the heavy table, the one he had built for her, and jammed it against the door. He took the new boards from the half-finished barn and, using his axe as a hammer, nailed them over the small window, leaving only a narrow, 1-inch slit for the rifle. The cabin was now a tomb, a fortress. They sat in the dark. The silence was heavier than the stone walls. They waited for the sound of hoofbeats. It came, not as hoofbeats, but as a whisper. A small pebble skittered down the rock face near the door. Elias, his ear pressed to the wall, heard it. He held up a hand, a voice, high and reedy, cut through the night. "Mirabelle, child, are you in there?" Elias and Mirabelle exchanged a look of pure confusion. He moved to the door. "Who's there?" "It's Ida Croft, the midwife." Elias moved the table, his muscles straining. He opened the door a crack. The old woman stood there, her face a mask of fear, her mule panting behind her. She was alone. She shoved a heavy cloth bag into his hands. "He's coming," she gasped, her voice thin. I went to Raleigh. He's drunk." "He said he'd handle it in the morning. But Paul, he's not waiting. He's been buying whiskey for every man who'll take it. He's telling them it's a posse, a holy cleansing." Elias pulled her inside, barring the door again. "You should not be here. Ida, you'll be killed." "I brought these." Ida opened the bag, her hands shaking. She laid out bandages, a bottle of laudanum, and a bottle of whiskey. "For the pain," she said, her eyes on Mirabelle. "Not the drinking, and—" From her apron, she pulled a heavy leather gun belt, a pistol, a twin to the one Elias had given Mirabelle, was holstered in it. "This was my husband's. He's been gone 20 years. It's loaded. I don't know if I came to help you or to die with you, but I am not on the side of the men with the ropes." Before Elias could speak, another sound came. A shuffling, a quiet knock. Elias put his eye to the slit. A man, thin and hunched, stood by the rock wall. It was Mr. Jensen, the farmer. He was holding a sack. I saw Ida ride out," Jensen stammered, his voice barely audible. What the preacher said, what my wife, we was wrong. I ain't a brave man, but I ain't a killer." He thrust the sack at Elias. "It's 2 boxes of shells. For the Winchester, 4440. I hunt with the same and my grandfather's old shotgun. It's all I got." He dropped the sack and ran, disappearing into the darkness. Elias stared at the shells. He looked at Ida, who was holding the pistol with 2 hands. He looked at Mirabelle, who was loading the cartridges into the rifle. The town that had condemned them was, in its own quiet, fractured way, arming them. "Get down," Elias said, his voice now hard. "Get against the wall." He handed Ida the shotgun. "If they come through that door, you shoot." The sky, which had been clear, began to change. The wind picked up, howling through the canyon, a low, mournful sound. Clouds, thick and black, rolled in, obscuring the moon. A storm, just like all the others. The first shout was Paul's. "Witch, come out! Come out and face your judgment!" The voice came from the ridge. "From everywhere." "He's got them spread out," Elias whispered. His eye to the slit. He could see them, dark shapes against the sky. 5, 6, maybe 7. "Tonight, you pay for your sins!" the preacher's voice shrieked, high and manic. "The fires of judgment are here." As he spoke, a new sound cut the air. A thwump, and then a flicker of light. An arrow, its head wrapped in oil-soaked rags, embedded itself in the old wood of the barn. "The barn," Mirabelle whispered, her voice dead. "The barn Elias had promised to fix." Another arrow followed, and another. Within a minute, the structure was engulfed in flames. The fire cast a wild, dancing, hellish light across the canyon. "He's trying to burn us out," Elias said, his hands steady as he chambered a round. "He's using the fire for light." The first rifle shot cracked. The bullet, fired from the ridge, slammed into the adobe wall, inches from Elias's head, sending rock and dust into the cabin. "Get down!" Elias yelled. He raised the Winchester, aimed at the muzzle flash, and squeezed the trigger. The explosion was deafening. A scream echoed from the ridge. A body tumbled down the rocks. "One!" "They're at the door!" Ida screamed. A heavy beam slammed against the door, the wood groaning. Elias turned from the window, grabbing his axe. Mirabelle was there, her father's pistol in her hand, her face a mask of pale, resolute fury. "Stand back," Elias growled. The door burst open, splintering from its hinges. Two men, their faces ugly in the firelight, stumbled in. Ida fired the shotgun. The blast threw her backward, but it hit the first man in the chest, sending him crashing to the floor. Dead, the second man, one of Paul's saloon friends, raised his pistol. He looked at Mirabelle. "The witch!" he sneered. Mirabelle, her hands shaking, fired the Colt. The bullet went wide. The man laughed and lunged for her. Elias was on him, his axe a silver blur. The fight was short and brutal, and ended with a sound that made Ida sick. 2. Elias was panting, his body slick with sweat and blood. He looked at Mirabelle. "Are you?" A shadow filled the ruined doorway. Paul Aguirre. His face was a mask of demonic joy, the scar on his temple purple in the firelight. He was not looking at Mirabelle. He was not looking at Ida. He was looking at Elias, whose back was turned. Paul raised his revolver. He was grinning. "It's over. Granger, she's mine!" "Elias!" Mirabelle screamed. She did not think. She did not plan. She was a healer. She was a protector. She saw the man she loved, and she saw the man she hated. She launched herself forward, a desperate flying tackle, pushing Elias toward the floor, shielding him with her own body. The gun fired. The sound was flat, swallowed by the storm and the fire. Elias felt the impact. He felt her body go stiff, a violent, electric jolt. He heard her cry out, a sharp, choked gasp, a sound of surprise and terrible, final pain. She collapsed onto him. "Mirabelle," he whispered. He rolled her over. His hands came away black with blood. The shot had taken her high in the shoulder, near the chest. "No, no, no! I got her!" Paul roared from the doorway, laughing, the sound broken by the wind. "I got the witch! I finally got her!" Elias felt a coldness spread through him that had nothing to do with the rain. A pure, empty, lethal rage. He pushed Mirabelle gently into the darkest corner, behind the hearth. "Stay down," he whispered, though he knew she could not hear him. "Stay with me." He dragged her with one arm, covering her with his own body. He looked at Paul, who was advancing into the room, his pistol still smoking. The preacher was behind him, his eyes wide and insane, clutching a burning torch. "It's over. Demons," the preacher hissed. "Time to burn." Elias grabbed the rifle. He had one shot. "Paul Aguirre, drop the weapon." The voice was a roar, louder than the storm. It came from behind Paul. Paul froze. He turned. Sheriff Raleigh stood in the ruined doorway, his face soaked, his pistol leveled. Behind him stood his wife, holding a lantern, and behind her, Mr. Jensen and two other farmers, their hunting rifles raised. Ida, it seemed, had not been the only one to sound the alarm. It was a standoff. The cabin was a frozen, terrible tableau. Paul and the preacher, lit by the barn fire, Raleigh and the townsfolk, lit by the lantern, and in the corner, Elias covering a bleeding, dying woman with his body. "Raleigh," Paul sneered, his confidence returning. "You're too late. We're just cleaning up the devil's mess." "I see the devil," Raleigh said, his voice shaking with a fury Elias had not known he possessed. "And he's holding a pistol. I said drop it. Paul, this is over." Paul's eyes darted. His saloon friends were dead or gone. The men on the ridge had fled after Elias's shot. It was just him, the preacher, and a town that had finally turned against him. He was a coward. He had always been a coward. He grabbed the preacher, shoving the man into Raleigh. "To hell with all of you!" he screamed, and he bolted. He did not go out the door. He dove through the open. Shattered windows slit into the mud in the rain. "He's getting away! Mrs.!" Raleigh screamed. Elias was torn. He could not leave Mirabel. "Go!" Raleigh yelled at him. "Go with her! I'll get the snake!" Raleigh plunged into the darkness after Paul. Elias heard them, shouting, struggling in the mud. He heard a single, muffled gunshot, and then silence. He ignored it, all of it. He turned his attention to Mirabel. "Ida," he said, his voice breaking. "Help me." The midwife was already there, pushing him aside, her hands professional. "Bring the lantern, woman," she yelled at Mrs. Raleigh. They moved Mirabel onto her pallet. The front of her blouse was a solid, dark stain. She was pale, her lips blue, her breathing a shallow, wet rattle. She's... Elias could not say the word. "She's alive," Ida said, her voice sharp. She was packing the wound with clean linen, pouring the whiskey onto it. Mirabel did not even flinch. "But she is badly hurt. The bullet is deep. It missed her heart. Praise God. But she is bleeding. Elias, hold her hand. Talk to her. Do not let her go." Raleigh appeared in the doorway, his chest heaving. He was dragging Paul, who was limp and bleeding from a shot in the leg. Raleigh threw him onto the cabin floor. The preacher was on his knees, weeping, his torch extinguished in the mud. The sheriff looked at the devastation. He looked at the two dead men on the floor. He looked at the burning barn, the flames now dying in the downpour. And he looked at Mirabel, lying on the pallet, her lifeblood soaking into the straw. He looked at his wife, at Jensen, at the other farmers. His face was a mask of shame. "This," he said, his voice a low, broken growl, "is what you wanted, what this town wanted. You needed a monster. You needed a curse, so you didn't have to look at your own sins." He kicked Paul, who groaned. "This town created its own curse," he said, his voice shaking. "We let fear win. We let rumors and a preacher's madness and a coward's lies rule us. We did this." Ida looked up from her work, her face grim. "She's burning with fever. The ball is still in there. I cannot get it. All we can do is wait and pray." Raleigh and his wife cleared the cabin. They took Paul and the preacher and the dead. They left Elias alone with Mirabel. Ida stayed for an hour, cleaning the wound, forcing laudanum and water between her lips. But finally, she too left. "I will be back at dawn, if she lives that long." Elias sat on the floor, in the dark, the fire from the barn now just a dull, red glow through the rain. The storm had passed. The cabin was cold. He held her hand. It was cold. "Mirabel," he whispered. You can't go." She was in the fever, she began to murmur, her head tossing on the pallet. She was not in the cabin. She was in the past. "The water," she gasped, her eyes squeezed shut. "So cold. Mama, hermano, the water is taking me." "I have you," Elias said, his voice raw, his tears falling onto her hand. "I have you. You're not in the water. You're with me." She turned her head, her brow furrowed. She spoke of dreams. "The hawk, he carved it. It's so bright. It flies. It flies. But the string is broken." He reached into his own pocket, his hand closing around the bone pendant he had picked up in the ruins. Her breathing grew shallow. He could feel her slipping. She was speaking of death. "It's burning. Paul, let it burn. Let me burn. It's so dark." He could not bear it. He leaned down, his face next to hers, his beard brushing her fever-hot skin. He would not let her go. He would hold her here with his own will. "You listen to me," he whispered, his voice a fierce, desperate promise. "You are not leaving. You will not let him win. You will not let this town win. You will wake up." She went still. "Do you hear me?" he sobbed, his body shaking. "You will wake up to sunlight, and my hand, I am holding on. You hold on too." He sat there, holding her hand, his own blood and hers drying on his skin. He did not move. He watched the night. He watched the blackness of the cabin. He watched the grayness of the ruined doorway. He sat for hours. The night was endless. He felt her hand grow colder. Then, a single, pale, gray-gold ray of sunlight cut through the smoke and the rain-washed air. It pierced the cabin, striking the wall above her pallet. A single, clean line of light. Edlius sat, unmoving, a statue of grief. He was still holding her hand. The light crawled down the wall. It touched her face. He watched. His heart stopped. Her eyelids flickered. She turned her head. A slow, agonizing movement. Away from the shadows, toward the light. Her eyes, cloudy with pain and laudanum, opened. They were unfocused. Then, they found his. She did. The first 2 weeks were a blur of fever and blood. Mirabel did not die, but she teetered on the very edge of the world. Her life held in the hands of 2 people, Ida, the midwife, and Elias, the man who refused to leave. Ida came every morning, her face a grim mask of professionalism. She was the one who, on the 3rd day, with Elias holding Mirabel down, had cut the bullet from her shoulder. It was a messy, brutal piece of work, done on the cabin's floor with whiskey for cleaning and a leather strap for Mirabel to bite. Elias had watched, his stomach churning, his face pale, but his hands had been steady. He was the one who sat through the nights. He was the one who held the cup of water to her cracked lips, who bathed her skin when the fever spiked, who changed the bloody bandages. His touch surprisingly gentle for a man with such rough hands. He listened to her fever dreams, the jumbled fragments of her past, her mother's song, her brother's laugh, the sound of the flood, the crackle of Paul's fire. He learned every shadow of her history in those dark, terrible hours. The town, it seemed, was holding its breath. On the 5th day, Sheriff Raleigh rode out. Elias met him at the ruined barn, the rifle in his hand. "I'm not here for trouble, son," Raleigh said, his voice weary. He held up a hand. I came to see how she fares." "Oh, she's alive," Elias said, his voice flat. "No thanks to you." Raleigh flinched, but he took the rebuke. "Paul is in my cell. The preacher, too, inciting a riot. Attempted murder. The circuit judge will be here in a month. This time, the truth will be heard." He looked at the burned-out shell of the barn. "We, the town, we took up a collection for the damages." He held out a small, heavy cloth bag. "Coin." Elias stared at it. "We don't want your money." "It ain't my money," Raleigh said. "It's Ida's, and Jensen's, and my wife's. It's for her. For the healing. Take it, son, please. Let us do this one. Small, right thing." Elias took the bag. It felt heavy with more than just silver. It was the town's shame. "She's a good woman, you know," Raleigh said, looking at the cabin door. "My wife always said so. We just got so scared." "Go away, Sheriff," Elias said. Raleigh nodded and rode away. Weeks passed. The fever broke. The wound, under Ida's and Mirabel's own herbal poultices, began to close. The angry red flesh turned to a puckered pink scar. The first day she sat up, the room swam, and she collapsed back, weeping from the weakness. "You're all right," Elias said, his hand on her good shoulder. "You're all right." The town changed. It was not a miracle. It was a slow, painful, and awkward turning. The hatred, which had been a loud, open fire, was gone, snuffed out by the night of the shootout. In its place was a quiet, watchful shame. When Elias rode to town for supplies, using the money Raleigh had given him, no one hissed, no one spat. They just watched him. The storekeep, the same one who had denied Mirabel cartridges, now rushed to fill his order, his eyes on the floor. He refused to take Elias's coin. It's on the house, Mr. Granger." "I'm paying," Elias said, his voice cold. He threw the coins on the counter. He did not want their charity. He wanted their respect. He realized, still a long way from getting that. Mirabel's healing was slow. First, she sat. Then, she stood, her knuckles white as she gripped the table Elias had rebuilt. Her first steps were a shuffle, her body tilted, her breath coming in sharp gasps of pain. Elias was her crutch. She would lean on him, her arm around his waist, her hand clutching his shirt. They would walk, every day, a little farther. First, from the pallet to the door. Then, from the door to the garden. "It's enough," she would gasp, the sweat on her brow. "Leave me. We're going to the rock," he would say, his voice stubborn, his arm a steel band around her. One more step. He was relentless. He was gentle. He would not let her give up. As she regained her strength, he rebuilt the barn. He used the town's money to buy new, milled timber. Jensen came out, his hat in his hands, and offered to help. Elias looked at him, at his nervous, shamed face. I can swing a hammer. Mr. Granger." I owe her. I owe you." "All right," Elias said. "But you'll call me Elias, and you'll call her Mirabelle." They worked, the two of them. The sound of hammers echoed in the canyon, a sound of creation, not destruction. It was a good sound. Mirabelle would sit in the sun, her herbs in her lap, and watch them. She watched Elias, his back bare in the sun, the muscles moving as he swung the axe. He was not a man of pretty words. He was a man of action. He was a man who fixed things. He was fixing the barn. He was fixing her. The town, one by one, began to show its face. They did not come to her. They came to Elias. Mrs. Raleigh brought a fresh-baked loaf of bread. Mrs. Jensen brought a jar of pickled eggs. They would hand them to Elias, their eyes darting to Mirabelle, who sat watching them, her face unreadable. They would murmur a "hope she's feeling better," and then scurry away, like children who had broken a window. Mirabelle watched them come and watched them go. She held their fear and their guilt in her hand, and she did not know what to do with it. The barn was finished. It was a solid, beautiful thing, the new wood smelling of pine and promise. Elias had even built a stall. The day came, the day that changed everything. A boy, riding a horse lathered in sweat, galloped into the canyon. He was no older than 15. He pulled up, his eyes wide with terror when he saw Mirabelle, standing in the doorway. "Ma'am," he panted. "Mirabelle." "I am Mirabelle," she said, her voice rusty, but strong. It's my mother, Mrs. Hemlock." He was the son of the woman who had accused Mirabelle of cursing her stillborn child. "The baby, it's coming, but it's wrong. It's sideways. Ma says, and Ida Croft is in the next county. A flu. She's not here. Ma is screaming. She's dying. I think." The boy was weeping. She said to get you. She said, "Get the healer, please, ma'am, please." Mirabelle froze. Elias stepped up beside her, his hand on her back. He looked at the boy, then at her. He did not speak. This was her choice. The Hemlock woman. The one who had wept in the saloon. The one who had screamed her guilt. To go to her, it was to walk back into the heart of the pain. Mirabelle looked at the boy. She saw his fear. She saw his mother's desperation. She went into the cabin. She came out a moment later, her bag of herbs in one hand, her laudanum in the other. "Help me onto the mule, Elias," she said. The ride to town was different. She rode. Elias walked beside her. The Hemlock boy galloped ahead, shouting that she was coming. When they arrived, the main street was silent, but this time, the silence was not hatred. It was awe. The women of the town were gathered on the porch of the Hemlock house. They parted for her, like the Red Sea. They looked at her pale, scarred face, at her arm, which she still held stiffly against her side. They looked at her with fear, and with a new, fragile, desperate hope. She walked into the house. Elias stood guard at the door. He would not let them hurt her, but he would not interfere. He stood there for 4 hours. He heard screaming. He heard weeping. He heard the low, rhythmic murmur of Mirabelle's voice, singing. Not in Spanish, not in English, but in the old, soft language of her grandmother. He heard the sharp, sudden cry of a newborn. The door opened. Mirabel walked out. She was covered in blood, her face pale with exhaustion, her hands shaking, but she was standing tall. She walked past Elias. She walked to the porch railing. She was shaking so hard she could barely stand. Mrs. Hemlock, the mother, came out, wrapped in a blanket. She was weak, but she was alive. In her arms, she held a red, squirming, healthy baby. A girl. Mrs. Hemlock walked over to Mirabel. The whole town was watching. She did not speak. She just looked at Mirabel, her eyes streaming with tears. And she knelt. She knelt in the dust, and she kissed Mirabel's bloody, herb-stained hands. Mirabel pulled her hands away, gently. "Get up," she whispered, her voice shaking. Do not do that." "Thank you," Mrs. Hemlock wept. "Thank you, healer." Mirabel turned and walked, as fast as she could, to the mule. Elias helped her up. They rode out of town, the silent, stunned gratitude of the women following them all the way to the canyon. She did not speak the whole way home. When they arrived, she slid off the mule, walked to the cabin, and collapsed onto her pallet, where she wept for an hour. Elias sat with her, his hand on her back. He did not understand. It was, she finally sobbed. "She kissed my hands, Elias, after everything, after they wanted to hang me. She knelt." "You saved her," he said, his voice soft. "You saved her baby." "I know." She looked up, her face a mess of tears and pride. "I know, it was good." He let her cry. He let her feel the pride. He waited until the sun was setting, until the canyon was filled with purple shadows. "I have to tell you something," he said. She sat up, wiping her face. "What is it?" "I bought the land." "What?" "The land, this canyon, and the high pastures. Up top, all of it." He pulled a folded, official-looking paper from his shirt. "Sheriff Raleigh. He helped. With the money from the collection, and with the money I earned from Jensen. I bought it from the land office. It's ours." She stared at the paper. Her name, Mirabel Granger. No, not Granger. Mirabel. He had not known her last name. He had just put Mirabel. And his Elias Granger. "Ours?" she whispered. "I want to build a home with you." "Mirabel," he said, his voice rough. He was not a man for speeches. This was hard for him. A real home, not a cave, a house, with windows, and a porch. She looked at him, her heart so full it ached. She looked at the paper, at the new barn, at the scar on her shoulder. "They will never forget," she warned him, her voice low. "They will be kind, now. They will bring bread, but they will never forget who I am. They will never forget what they called me." "They don't need to," Elias replied, his voice a low, fierce promise. He took her hand, the one that had delivered a baby, the one that had held a knife. "I didn't choose you because they would. I didn't choose you so the town would like me." He met her eyes, and she saw his whole, simple, stubborn, and unshakable heart. "I chose you because I do." She did not need to say yes. It was already done. They were married a week later. It was not a wedding for the town. It was not a wedding for God, or for the preacher, who was now awaiting a judge's sentence. It was a wedding for the canyon. It was twilight. The sky was a deep, bruised purple. The first stars appearing. There was no one there, just Elias in a clean shirt, and Mirabel in her cleanest brown skirt. She had woven a string of small, white desert flowers into her hair. They stood at the entrance to the canyon, at the place where the water had first brought them together. There was no book, there was no preacher. Elias took her hands. "I am not a man of words. Mirabel, you know that. I was a dead man when I came here. You gave me life. You gave me a home. I will not leave you. I will not fail you. I am yours." Mirabel looked at him, her eyes shining in the dim light. "I was a ghost. Elias, I was a woman of silence and shadows. You were not afraid. You were not afraid of my past or my pain. You saw me. You rebuilt my barn. You held my hand in the fever. You are my home." She pulled a single red ribbon from her pocket, a ribbon she had once used to bind a bundle of yarrow. "My grandmother," she said, her voice soft, "taught me this, the old way." She took his left hand. She took her own. She bound them together, wrist to wrist, with the red ribbon, the ends dangling, the hand fasting. "With this ribbon," she said, her voice gaining strength, "I bind my life to yours, my blood to yours, my shadow to your light, until the canyon crumbles, until the river stops, until the canyon crumbles," he repeated, his voice thick. He leaned in and kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion. It was not a kiss of comfort. It was a kiss of contract. It was a kiss of peace. That night, they lay together on the pallet in the cabin, for the last time. He had already started on the new house, on the high ground, but for tonight, they were in the cave, in the place where they had been forged. The silence was different. It was not empty. It was full. It was full of the day, of the promise, of the new, terrifying, wonderful future. He turned to her. He did not take her with the desperate, biting hunger of their past. He touched her with a new, slow reverence. He touched her scars, the one on her ribs, the one on her shoulder, and he kissed them, not to heal them, but to honor them. He was honoring the woman who had survived, and she held him. She held the man who had stayed. She held her husband. Their passion was slow. It was reverent. It was the careful, tender act of two broken things, mending each other, becoming whole. The past was there. It was a scar that would always ache before a storm. But the future, finally, was tender. The next morning, Mirabelle woke before the dawn. It was a habit she would never break. Elias was asleep beside her, his breathing deep, his arm thrown protectively over her waist. She slipped out from under it. Quietly, she put on her old skirt. She did not bother with boots. She walked out of the cabin, into the cool, gray morning. The air was clean, washed by the night. The canyon was hers, her home. She walked barefoot, her feet knowing the path. She walked past the new barn, past the garden, toward the arroyo. She was looking for herbs. She was always looking. The sun began to rise, and the first rays, the color of gold and rose, struck the canyon walls. She stopped. There, growing in the new, damp silt left by the last flood, was a plant, a small, green-leafed thing, with a tiny, brilliant blue flower, a color of blue she had never seen. It was not yarrow. It was not mugwort. It was not anything her grandmother had taught her. It was new. She knelt in the dirt, the cool earth pressing against her knees. She looked at this new, unknown, and beautiful thing. She reached out, her fingers, the ones the town had kissed, and she gently touched a leaf. A smile, slow and wide and real, spread across her face. The curse, it seemed, was never hers to carry. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I truly hope you enjoyed the journey with Elias and Mirabelle. My name is from Wild West, and I love bringing these tales of the Old West to life. I would be so honored if you would take a moment to comment below and let me know where in the world you are listening from. It is always a thrill to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing to the channel, From Wild West, for many more stories just like this one. And finally, I would love to hear your thoughts. What did you think of Mirabelle's and Elias's story? Please share your feelings in the comments, in English, so we can all be part of the conversation. Thank you again. And until next time,